You typed it at 11:47 at night. 3 lines, maybe 4. Something you would only say to one person. You read it back once, changed a single word, and pressed send. You think that message went straight from your phone to theirs. A private line, 2 people, 1 thread, a little lock icon that promised nobody else was in the room. Here is what the lock icon does not tell you. In the version of the future that Europe is voting on right now, your phone reads the message before it ever leaves your hand. Not the person you sent it to. Your own phone. Working, quietly, for someone else. They call it chat control. And it is a lot closer than you think. Let me tell you what is actually on the table, because the name is doing a great deal of quiet work. The European Union has spent years drafting a single law. On paper, it is called the Child Sexual Abuse Regulation. In the rooms where it is argued over, almost nobody uses that name. They just call it chat control. And this year, after cycle upon cycle of stalled votes and rewrites, it is expected to move toward adoption in the spring. And you should know how it got here, because the path tells you something. This law has been on the table, in one form or another, for years. It has been proposed, torn apart, quietly shelved, and rewritten more times than most people can count. Each version arrives wearing a slightly different face. Sometimes the scanning is described as mandatory, forced on every platform by a detection order. When that version draws too much fire, a softer edition appears, where the scanning is called voluntary, as if a company being pressured by an entire continent has a real choice in the matter. The language softens, the core stays exactly the same. It has been blocked before. More than once, a coalition of countries has looked at what was actually written, counted the cost and refused to give it the votes. Privacy campaigners have called it dead, buried, finished, and every time after a decent interval, it comes back. Same idea. New wrapping, a new committee, a new urgency, a new reason this is finally the year. That persistence is not an accident. It is the pattern of every surveillance power ever proposed. You do not pass the sweeping version on the first try. You introduce it, let it fail, and wait. You return with something narrower and more reasonable, and you keep returning until the public is exhausted and the objection sounds tired and familiar. The goal is not to win the argument. The goal is to still be standing when everyone else stops paying attention. So when you hear that chat control is expected to move toward adoption this spring, understand that this is not a sudden idea. It is the latest attempt in a long campaign to normalize one specific thing: the scanning of private messages, at scale, on ordinary people. The stated goal is one that no decent person argues with. Stop the spread of child sexual abuse material. Find the monsters. Protect the kids. Say it out loud and the room goes silent, because who is going to stand up and speak against that? That silence is the whole trick. Hold on to it. We're going to come back to it. Because underneath the name, the mechanism is something the world has never agreed to before. The regulation, in its current shape, pushes messaging platforms to scan the private communications of ordinary people for illegal content. Not the messages of suspects. Not the messages of anyone accused of anything. Everyone. Your group chat with your family. Your late-night thread with the one person you trust. The photo you sent your partner that was never meant for another set of eyes. All of it. Checked. On your device. Against a list you will never see. To understand why that matters, you have to understand what it breaks. For the last decade, the best messaging apps have run on something called end-to-end encryption. The idea is simple and beautiful. When you send a message, it gets scrambled on your phone into noise. It travels across the world as noise, and it only turns back into words on the phone of the person you sent it to. In between, nobody can read it. Not the company. Not a hacker sitting on the same coffee shop network. Not a government with a warrant, because there is nothing to hand over. Just noise. That little lock icon is real. It is one of the few genuinely private things left in your entire day. Chat control does not attack the lock directly. It is smarter than that. It does not try to pick the encryption, because good encryption cannot be picked. Instead, it moves the search to a place where the message is still readable. It moves the search onto your phone, before the scrambling happens. Think of it like this. Encryption is a sealed envelope. You write your letter, you fold it, you seal it, and from that moment nobody along the way can read a word. Chat control does not steam open the envelope. It stands over your shoulder while you write, reads every line as your pen moves, and only then lets you seal it. They have a technical name for this, client-side scanning, but strip the jargon away and it is exactly that image. A reader over your shoulder, living inside the device you paid for, that never blinks and never leaves. And here is the part that should stop you cold. Once that reader exists, the envelope no longer matters. You can seal it with the strongest encryption ever built. It does not help you because the search already happened before the seal. The privacy you thought you had was spent before you ever pressed send. So when officials say this law does not break encryption, listen carefully to the words. Technically, they are right. They are not breaking the lock. They are just making sure someone reads the letter before the lock is ever needed. The result is the same. The comfort is gone. Now, let us talk about the reader itself because the people selling you this promise, it is smart, precise, that it will only ever flag the genuinely criminal, the truly vile, and leave the rest of us alone. The people who actually study these systems tell a different story. The scanning works by comparison and by guessing. Some of it compares your images against known illegal files. Some of it, the newer and more aggressive kind, uses artificial intelligence to guess whether a photo it has never seen before might be illegal. And an AI that guesses is an AI that is wrong, constantly, at a scale that is hard to picture. A former member of the European Parliament, a jurist and digital rights campaigner named Patrick Breyer, has spent years fighting this law in public. His warning is blunt. He calls it warrantless and error-prone mass surveillance. And the error-prone part is not an insult. It is a measurement. Because think about what these systems actually see. A parent sends a photo of their toddler in the bath to the child's grandmother. A teenager sends a picture to a partner their own age. A doctor receives a medical image from a worried patient. A couple shares something private and completely legal that is meant for exactly two people on this earth. To an algorithm scanning for skin and shapes and context it cannot understand, all of that looks like a possible hit. And when the system decides it might have found something, the message does not stay private while a machine sorts it out. It gets flagged. It gets sent onward. It lands in front of a human reviewer, a stranger, and potentially in front of the police. Critics of the law estimate that this would drag tens of thousands of entirely legal private chats in front of the authorities. Not criminals, ordinary people having ordinary lives whose most intimate moments got misread by a machine and forwarded to a government office for review. Sit with that for a second. Your family photo, your private message, in a police file not because you did anything, but because a piece of software could not tell the difference. And once it is in that file, you do not get to take it back. You were never even told it left your phone. This is the second trick, and it is quieter than the first. The system does not need to catch criminals to change how you live. It only needs you to know it is watching. Because once you know a stranger might read the photo, you stop sending the photo. Once you know a machine flags certain words, you start choosing different words. You begin, without ever deciding to edit yourself, to live a little smaller. That shrinking is not a side effect of surveillance. For a lot of people who build these systems, it is the point. And I know the answer that is already forming in your head because it is the one everyone reaches for. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. It sounds like common sense. It is the most successful lie in the entire history of surveillance. You have plenty you are not hiding but would never want read aloud. The message to your doctor. The argument with your partner you both regret. The joke that would sound ugly stripped of context. The photo that was innocent between two people and grotesque in a stranger's hands. None of it is a crime. All of it is yours. Privacy was never about hiding wrongdoing. It is the simple human right to decide who gets to see your life. The moment that decision is made for you, by a machine, on behalf of the state, you do not lose your secrets. You lose the ability to have any private life at all. And a person who cannot close a single door is not free. They are just well behaved because they know someone is always watching. And if any of this sounds hypothetical, understand that it has already been tried by one of the most powerful and careful companies on the planet, and it collapsed. A few years ago, Apple announced almost exactly this, a system that would scan photos on your iPhone, on the device itself, comparing them against a list of known illegal images before they were ever uploaded. The company framed it the same way the law does now, precise, privacy preserving, only ever aimed at the worst material. They had some of the best engineers in the world and a genuine reputation for protecting their users, and they believed they had solved the puzzle. They had not. Security researchers took the system apart and found the cracks almost immediately. They showed that the matching could be fooled, that innocent images could be manipulated to trigger a false hit, that the underlying method could produce collisions where two completely different pictures registered as the same. Worse, they laid out the argument that everyone in power keeps trying to wave away. Once the scanning machinery exists on the device, it does not matter what it was built to find. The same system, with a different list quietly loaded in, could search for anything a government demanded. A political image, a banned symbol, a leaked document. The technology could not tell the difference, and neither could the user, because the whole point was that it ran silently. The backlash was enormous. Privacy groups and security experts and ordinary customers pushed back so hard that Apple first paused the plan and then, quietly, killed it entirely. The company that proposed on-device scanning walked away from it, not because it stopped caring about children, but because its own experts could not make the machine safe. They could not build a reader that stayed over one shoulder. Once it existed, it could be turned to face anyone. Now hold that memory up against chat control. What a private company examined, tested, and abandoned as too dangerous to deploy, lawmakers are now proposing to make the law. Not optional, not a feature you can decline by choosing a different phone, a legal requirement across an entire continent. The experiment already ran, it already failed. And the response is to run it again, this time with no off switch. But let us give the other side its due. Honestly, because this is where most people telling you this story cheat. The problem chat control is aimed at is real. Child sexual abuse material is not a talking point. It is one of the genuine horrors of the connected world, and the people trying to stop it are not villains. Investigators who work these cases carry things most of us could never look at. When they say encrypted platforms make their job harder, they are not lying. They are describing their actual days. So this is not a fairy tale with a clear monster. It is the hardest kind of problem. A real evil on one side, and a tool to fight it that, if you build it, quietly dismantles the privacy of 500 million innocent people on the other. Two things that both matter, pulling in opposite directions. The honest question is not whether we should fight child abuse. Of course we should. The honest question is whether you can build a machine that reads everyone's private messages and expect it to only ever be used for one good thing. History has an answer to that question, and it is not a comforting one. Because here is what happens to a tool like this. You do not get to install a reader over everyone's shoulder and then promise it will only ever look for one category of crime. The scanner does not care what it is searching for. It searches for whatever the list tells it to search for. And lists change. Governments change. Definitions of what is dangerous, what is extreme, what is illegal, they get rewritten by whoever holds power next. Today the list is the worst material imaginable, and the argument is airtight. But the infrastructure you build today outlives today's intentions. A scanner built to find one thing can be pointed at another with a single update, and a signature nobody outside the room ever sees. Dissidents, journalists and their sources, protesters organising something a government would rather not happen. Once the reader lives in every phone, the only thing standing between you and a wider search is the promise of the people in charge. And promises are not encryption. And there is a detail buried inside this that deserves a light shined on it. Because it is where the real power sits. The scanner works from a list, a database of what to look for, usually stored as digital fingerprints of the forbidden material. You will never see that list. You cannot audit it. You cannot check what is on it or who added it, or whether every entry truly belongs to the category everyone agreed to. That is not a small gap. It is the entire game. The public debate is about a category everyone accepts as evil. But the actual control lives in a file that a handful of institutions maintain, in secret, by necessity. And the honest truth is that you are being asked to trust forever, that nothing else ever gets added to that file. That no future official, in no future crisis, ever decides that one more type of image, one more phrase, one more fingerprint, belongs on the list too. You would have no way to know. The scanner would simply start flagging something new, and the first you might hear of it is a knock at the door. Every mass surveillance system in history has run on that same quiet arrangement. A secret list, a trusted authority and a promise that the list will never grow. The list always grows. There is one more thing the scanning misses in the headlines but never misses in practice, and it is the pattern of your life. Even setting aside the words inside your messages, a system watching your communications learns who you talk to, when, how often, and how the shape of that changes. Who you message at 3 in the morning, which contact you suddenly stop talking to, which new number appears in your life the week before something happens. That map, the web of your connections, often tells a more revealing story than any single message ever could. You can guard every word you write and still hand over the outline of your entire private world simply by being watched at all. This is not paranoia. It is the reason the people who build the most private messengers in the world have drawn a hard line. Some of them have said, plainly and publicly, that they would rather pull their app out of Europe entirely than break the promise their encryption makes. They understand something simple. A back door built for the good guys is just a door. And a door can be opened by anyone who gets the key, whether they were meant to have it or not. And there is a second half to this law that gets far less attention, which is exactly why it deserves yours. Alongside the scanning, the proposal pushes for age verification. To keep children off certain services, platforms would have to check how old their users are. It sounds reasonable until you follow it through. To prove you are an adult, you have to prove who you are, which means the quiet corners of the internet, where you could simply be a person, anonymous and unbothered, start to close. The whistleblower, the abuse survivor looking for help, the person in a place where the wrong opinion is dangerous, the teenager figuring out who they are, all of them lose the one thing that made those corners safe: the ability to not be identified. Age verification and message scanning are sold as separate features. They are not. They are two halves of the same idea. One learns what you say. The other learns exactly who you are. Together they close the gap between the two. And do not make the mistake of thinking this is only a European problem, something happening safely on the other side of an ocean. The pressure to weaken private communication is global, and it is coordinated in spirit, even when it is not coordinated on paper. The United Kingdom has spent years pushing its own powers to reach into encrypted services. Other governments watch the European fight closely because they know how this works. The moment one major democracy normalizes scanning private messages, it stops being extreme. It becomes the template, the thing everyone points to. Well, Europe does it, so why not here? That is how a line gets moved. Not in one dramatic law, but in one respectable country going first so that every country after it can call the same thing normal. So where does that leave you tonight, with your phone in your hand and a message half-typed? Start by understanding what you actually have. End-to-end encryption is still, right now, the strongest privacy most people will ever get, and it is worth protecting precisely because powerful people keep trying to hollow it out. Learn which of your apps really use it by default for every message, and not just as an optional setting buried 3 menus deep. There is a real difference between a service that cannot read your messages and one that simply promises not to. Understand the phrase client-side scanning, because that is the language the next version of this fight will hide behind. When someone tells you a new safety feature will protect the children and does not touch your encryption, ask the one question that cuts through it. Does anything read my messages before they are encrypted? If the answer is yes, or if the answer is a long pause, you already know what you are looking at. The envelope does not matter if someone reads over your shoulder. And pay attention to the vote. Laws like this do not pass because most people wanted them. They pass because most people never heard the real terms, while there was still time to say no. The pressure that stalled chat control for years came from ordinary people who understood what was actually being proposed and refused to be quiet about it. That is not nothing. That is the only thing that has worked. Remember the silence from the beginning, the one that falls when someone invokes the children and dares you to object. That silence is the most valuable thing in this entire debate, and it is being spent on your behalf to buy a machine that reads your life. You are allowed to hold 2 thoughts at once: that children must be protected, and that a reader living inside every phone on the continent is not protection, it is a permanent audience for your private life, sold to you under the best name anyone ever invented. The message you typed at 11:47 was meant for one person. In a world with chat control, it was always meant for one more, the one you never agreed to, the one that never sleeps, the one standing over your shoulder, reading before you ever press send. Know what your lock actually promises. Know who is trying to take it. And keep the last private room you have. Stay off grid.